This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
Well, friends, we've been spending a lot of time talking about Alberta's separation on the show, and there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, because, the show is proudly headquartered in Alberta. It's hosted by an Albertan. It's produced by a Florida and Ontario transport who is now also very proud to be an Albertan. I know Johnny Infamous flying the plane today, and there's an issue around Alberta's separation that demands discussion. And, of course, leading up to a referendum, October 19th, that looks like it could now, by the way, contain 11 questions. It could. Corb Lund is letting everybody know that they have received, they have secured, they have chased down, and they've got those nearly 180,000 signatures that they need to get their coal question on the referendum. And so attention continues to grow, and for good reason, around this democratic exercise that could very well mandate a change in Alberta's position in Confederation. Now, if you believe the prognosticators, if you believe the pollsters, you probably feel pretty secure with Alberta's place in Canada moving forward, but nothing's guaranteed. Sometimes in these exercises, they can get a little closer than people are comfortable with. Look at Quebec like 30 years ago. Sometimes they wind up going in a direction that most people, including the prognosticators, the pundits, and the pollsters, didn't expect, like Brexit. And as our feature guest today, Tyler Dawson, will argue with his brand new book out, The Republic of Alberta, an idea that won't go away, separatist sentiment in the province is nothing new. As a matter of fact, separatist sentiment in Alberta has been a thing for as long as Alberta has been a thing. So what does that mean for us today? What does this mean heading toward October or moving forward from there? That's where we're going to go in just a moment in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. Dominic Cardy is also going to join us on the back nine of this episode. You remember Dominic, a senior cabinet minister in the Maritimes in New Brunswick a short time ago, and wasn't afraid to say what he thought. Stirred shit up a tiny little bit, if we're going to be candid. He left that political calling, and he's now leading the Canadian Future Party. And he's got a really interesting piece taking a look at what's been happening in Russia, Ukraine, and drawing a parallel to Canada and Alberta as well. So we got a lot of ground to cover in this episode, which officially begins right after I remind you that our friends at Hansen Distillery are presenting this entire thing. As a matter of fact, without Hansen Distillery's support, this show wouldn't be happening, and we're thrilled to let you know that their Northern Eyes Whiskey Cherry is now out. That's right, cherry whiskey is Northern Eyes rye blended with sweet and sour cherries. It's a huge hit. Just ask anybody that's ever tried it. This is great for a cola mix, right? Kind of that cherry cola with a little bit of kick. Maybe after you mowed the lawn, maybe after your kid dropped a ski for the first time, is maybe now moving on to a wakeboard, whatever you're celebrating. Maybe you're building a Manhattan, right? This cherry whiskey will blow your mind. Now, you can find it at select retailers across Alberta, wherever you buy fine Alberta spirits. You can ask for it if you don't see it on the shelf, and don't forget, you can always shop online at hansendistillery.com. They'll ship across the country. I recommend, if you're anywhere near the Metro Edmonton region, that you pop in and see the team at Hansen in their tasting room. They've got a beautiful facility there on 174th Street, 111th Avenue, right there by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. They love to give tours. You can shop right off the shelf and celebrate that prairie grit that has defined Hansen since inception. You can learn more at hansendistillery.com. Hansen is made right here. Well, it's a real pleasure to welcome in person in our historic Mercer Warehouse studio in downtown Edmonton, a longtime Alberta correspondent, now working as an editor for the Globe and Mail. He's the author of the new book, The Republic of Alberta, an idea that won't go away. Tyler Dawson, thanks for making time for us. Welcome to Real Talk.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I was telling you when you walked in, you're grabbing a coffee. I said I've been reading your bylines for years and years. You've done a lot of work in the National Post, the Globe and Mail, and now this. You've been covering Alberta for a long time. You have a good command of the stories that define Alberta and that have defined Alberta for decades. But why was the book a necessary exercise?
Well, it's not the world's best answer, but no one else had done it. And it felt like, now was a good time to do it. I looked at who had written about the Alberta separatist movement in the past 40 odd years. And there were some books in the 70s and 80s. There was a book in the early 90s written by my friend Don Braid at the Calgary Herald. And then there's just this sort of nothing happened for 35 years, and I thought someone's going to do it. Someone's going to write the book, and I might as well try and be first.
I like it, and you are.
I am, yeah.
So congratulations. I want to let people know, by the way, the book is like I won't say bite-sized, that might take away from it, but it's like very digestible. It's like 100 pages.
Yeah.
You can pick it up. You can read it in an afternoon. People can read it at the lake, and I think really level up their understanding of what has gotten Alberta to this point. Maybe where Alberta started, like pre-1905, and where the province is going. I was laughing about this with you when you first came in, and I was sifting through here to find it, but you quote the Calgary Herald. This was back in 1904, and there was about $2.4 million that had been raised from lands across the country. And the quote here in the Calgary Herald in 1904, so 122 years ago, the conduct of administration in Ottawa quite sufficient to raise another rebellion in the Northwest Territories. There was talk of the Liberal Machine in Ottawa and a general sense, quote, this is the way the Liberal Party treats us. In 1905, the day before Alberta became a province, in the Calgary Herald, quote, the prairie provinces are robbed of their chief source of revenue, not for the benefit of the federal treasury, not for the Dominion at large, but for the benefit of the horde of grafters connected with the Ottawa Liberal Machine. This has been since inception.
Yeah, and it could have been written, yesterday. The sentiments go, way back. There's some other factors that are in play in the beginning that aren't so much in play now. I mean, we have control over our natural resources now, and we didn't in the same. Well, I guess perhaps a conservative politician might argue we don't have control over our natural resources.
I think they probably would.
That's half the problem. But there are some real similarities that run right through the historical record on this that make it kind of easy to string together this narrative over the last 120, 150 years.
How have federal politicians, how has Ottawa, or for that matter, maybe you might say the Crown, how has this been managed? Let's say since Alberta's, let's say since 1905.
Yeah, I mean, there was a big fight between sort of 1905 and 1930 between the Alberta government and the federal government in Ottawa, and this is over natural resources control, essentially. When Alberta and Saskatchewan become provinces in 1905, they don't have control over their land and natural resources, and this is a huge bone of contention for the provincial government. And in Ottawa, they basically say, look, if we gave up control of this, if we gave these control of natural resources and lands to the provinces, that's going to impede our national plans for settling the West, for developing the West and things like that. So they have this plan coming from Ottawa affecting the West, and they don't want the provinces to have their sort of fingers in the pot to muck it up. So I guess you could say a real paternalistic view towards the way the provinces would conduct themselves if they had the power that the older provinces have. And this just rubs Alberta really the wrong way, rubs Saskatchewan the wrong way. There's, to a lesser extent, fights over this sort of stuff in Manitoba, too. And it really all comes to a head in 1929, 1930, when Alberta and Saskatchewan finally get control over their own natural resources. This is sort of the first big victory of the prairie provinces over the Ottawa government. They sort of give up this power, this constitutional power that they've got. And of course, but that doesn't make any of this go away. We have fights that continue on through the decades, and we're living through another one of those moments now.
Yeah, late 1920s, early 1930s, so pre-Leduc number one.
Yeah,
there was some understanding that Alberta could be sitting on a wealth of natural resources, but it wasn't for sure. And at that point, Alberta would have been, I think, described as like a have-not province, right? Generally speaking. Everybody's struggling. The Great Depression, the kind of Dust Bowl idea. I mean, nobody really, some perhaps said that they did, but nobody really had a guarantee of what would happen within the next 20 years for Alberta.
No, I mean, that's one of the great and interesting things about the Alberta story is to some extent, yes, there's a lot of hard scrabble, hard work, and inventive genius that goes into the Alberta success story. But there's also a lot of it that's just pure dumb luck. You know, we happen to be on top of these amazing deposits of a product that is making people wealthy. And there, at no point in our history was there a guarantee that that was going to be discovered, that was going to be successfully developed, that we were going to turn, you know, oil into a product that has made us the richest province in Confederation. So I think the luck part of it is maybe an underappreciated part of the Alberta story, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Yeah. Well, what do they say? You got to be good to be lucky. You got to be lucky to be good.
And you make your own luck, right?
Yeah. Has in your estimation, as you've taken a look back and sort of participated in this like historic exercise, would you characterize the sentiments around Alberta's separation as like an economically driven sentiment? Is it a politically driven sentiment? Is it almost a cultural identity driving it? What would you say?
It's primarily economic, which is weird. If you look at other separatist movements around the world, including in Quebec, you know, Catalonia, Basque region in Spain, you have other sort of really important cultural aspects that go into this as well. You know, Quebec has a distinct language. They have a distinct culture. They have had for a long time a religion that was distinct from much of the rest of the country, and you don't really have that in the same way in Alberta. So there has to be something else that's driving this movement, and it really does seem to come down to economics. You know, if you look at what happened in the 1930s, if you look at what happened in the 1980s, if you look at what happened between 2015 and 2019, these are primarily economic concerns. There are some attempts to sort of shoehorn a cultural angle and a political angle into this. For example, we can say with, you know, a fair degree of certainty that under Stephen Harper's Conservative government, there wasn't really a separatist movement. Justin Trudeau's Liberal government comes into power, there is a separatist movement. So there is a political angle to this a little bit. There's maybe a little bit of a cultural angle to this. There are people who argue that Alberta has a distinct culture. I'm not totally persuaded by that case. But separatists do seem to think there is a cultural distinctiveness about Alberta. So it's part of the way they are thinking about themselves and the way they are thinking about their movement, whether or not an external observer can say with any sort of degree of confidence, look, there is a unique Alberta culture that is informing this. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but certainly the people involved in the movement do think there is a unique cultural aspect to Alberta.
Fascinating. When you look back in Alberta, there were these political dynasties, like almost back-to-back dynasties. It was like the New York Islanders and the Edmonton Oilers. You know what I mean? You had
that's a deep cut.
A deep cut, but you had this Ernest Manning legacy like for decades, and then you had the PC this dynasty for decades. And for the most part, we'll get to Pierre Elliott Trudeau. We'll get to the National Energy Program 100%. I have some particular questions about that, but I'm curious to know what you were able to determine or what Albertans remember about those Manning years throughout the social credit governments and into, you know, what was ushered in, you know, with Peter Lougheed and his compelling message and where Alberta's separation was at that point. I remember talking to both my grandpas a lot. You know, one of them worked for the Calgary Chamber of Commerce and really, I think, had a clear understanding of how Calgarians and Albertans felt and how they spent and how they invested. The other grandpa was an engineer for Chevron, and I heard a lot about the energy business from him. But I don't remember either of them ever talking about separation as a major thing. But was it simmering?
It was simmering to some extent. You know, you don't see very much in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. You do see a little bit of separation talk during the Great Depression. The Great Depression hits the West hard, I think in some ways harder than other parts of the country, because you had this simultaneous drought that really affected the farm harvest, and you have this massive collapse in farm incomes across Alberta during the Great Depression. And the federal government mostly leaves the management of the Depression to provincial governments, and it basically beggars provincial governments and municipal treasuries. And in the 1930s, the social credit government it was William Aberhart was premier at the time. They try to regulate the banks, basically. Because the social credit, right, they have this kooky theory of economics where they give, I can't remember what the opposition called it, funny money or something like that. They give money to Albertans to help them buy, you know, the necessaries of life. And so in order to do all this, social credit tries to regulate the banks, which is a federal power under the Constitution. It's a federally regulated industry. This causes another big fight with the federal government. And William Aberhart's caucus and supporters say, look, we support you in your fight with Ottawa up to and including secession, if that's what needs to happen. And Aberhart more or less refuses to go down that road, says, no, we're Canadians, we're not going to talk separatism. But that's one of the early moments where you see separation as an idea really come up in the midst of a political crisis, is in the 1930s. And then not a lot happens for a couple decades. And so the book, frankly, doesn't have very much about what happens in those decades because I couldn't find a lot in those decades. You begin to see this sort of come up again in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Maclean's magazine publishes a big piece on Western separatism generally, not Alberta specifically, and I think 1967 or 1969, and it looks at some of the issues that are angering Westerners. And it's, again, the same stuff that was upsetting people in 1904. It's the same stuff that's upsetting people now. It's these policies being dictated from Ottawa. You know, people are mad about Official Languages Act, for example, which, you know, official bilingualism in Canada is a big sort of stickler for another segment of early generation Alberta separatists. But there is this quiet period, sort of mid-century, where you just don't hear that much about it. And of course, this is the period of time when the oil is struck in Leduc and the oil industry starts to take off in the province, and Alberta really starts to come into its own, become a more wealthy province, a more powerful province as a result of that wealth.
Trevor's watching us right now on our live stream presented by California Closets. You can get a free quote anytime. Book a consultation at californiaclosets.ca. Says cultural identity in Alberta. He says Quebec has a unique language, a culture that is unique in Canada. Says Compton. Alberta's truck nuts and anti-vaxxers, not so unique to say the least. Not the most flattering description of Albertans, but it's been interesting over the past couple of weeks after seeing Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's trip to Quebec to meet with Premier Fréchette there, and we talked with Supriya Dwivedi about it and similarities and differences between Alberta and Quebec and whether or not the argument holds up. I'm not sure it actually really matters, to be honest with you. Hashing this out, whether or not there is that unique identity, but there's kind of, in a sense, different convictions on Alberta's place in Canada, or how unique Alberta is in Canada. It's interesting to hear you talk about Bible Bill, from Premier Aberhart, and there's been a lot of talk as well recently, I think, because it's more recent history. More people will remember Premier Ralph Klein, but Klein, while encountering separatism within his party, I'm sure, and within the province writ large, didn't seem to have much of an appetite for it. As a matter of fact, my understanding is that issued a directive even to his MLAs that it should be ignored for all intents and purposes. Some premiers have entertained it a little bit more enthusiastically than others. Yeah,
I will get to that in a second. I want to push back slightly against your listeners.
Do it!
Because why not? I do think there are some aspects of Alberta that are unique. I mean, I talked to Senator Paula Simons, who's not a conservative. She is about as far from a conservative and a separatist as you could get in Alberta, but she thinks there's a slightly unique culture in Alberta. She thinks there's a spirit of entrepreneurship here that you don't necessarily see in other parts of the country. She thinks that there is, a having to build your life around the weather that we all experience every winter has an effect on the culture here. I think there's probably some truth to that. I do think there is to a lesser extent than the United States, but sort of a frontier culture that exists in the early part of the 20th century that probably still informs the way Albertans think about themselves and each other a little bit. That is, if not unique in Canada, certainly special. So I don't think there's a distinct culture in the sense that we are a distinct society. Do I think there are aspects of the culture in Alberta that make it special or slightly different from other parts of the country? I think that's probably safe to say. You scratch someone from Fort St. John and someone from Grand Prairie, and there's not a whole lot of difference, or someone from Saskatoon, someone from Edmonton. But I think if you take it sort of in aggregate, there are some things about Alberta that make it special.
Which is great.
Yeah.
And should be celebrated.
Yeah, I agree.
I 100% agree.
Yeah. But the Ralph Klein question, the Ralph Klein's really interesting because there isn't a large separatist movement when Ralph Klein is in power, which is weird, right? Because Ralph Klein, for the first decade or so of his time in power, there's a Liberal government in Ottawa. And Ralph Klein spends a lot of time feuding with the Liberal government in Ottawa. So why isn't there a separatist movement? It's a bit of a weird question, and I don't know what the answer is to it. But what you do have is in 2001, you have a group of 6 conservatives. Stephen Harper is among them. Stockwell Day, I think, is among... No, maybe Stock isn't. Stock's advisor, Ken Bosencool, is involved in it. Andy Crooks, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Tom Flanagan, and Rainier Knopf at the University of Calgary. They write this document called the Firewall Letter, the Alberta Agenda. And in it, they say, Alberta needs to find a way to protect itself from Ottawa. And here are a bunch of policy proposals that will help Alberta do that. Now, these are still very much a part of Alberta's political culture, right? We talk about an Alberta provincial police force. We talk about an Alberta pension plan. These are ideas that sort of originate with these guys. And they write this letter. It's published in the National Post in January 2001. And they've addressed it to Ralph Klein, saying, Premier, build up this wall, basically. Ralph Klein responds in the Edmonton Journal and says, no, this is defeatist nonsense. We are Canadians. We are part of Canada. We do not need to build a wall around Alberta. We can work constructively with the rest of the country. Albertans have much to contribute to Canada, and he doesn't really entertain it. He does eventually strike a legislative committee that studies some of these questions, so he kind of entertains it. But he more or less dismisses the central thesis of this document, which is that Alberta needs to be protected from Ottawa. It's a very different moment, very different attitude than what we see from later premiers, in particular Jason Kenney and Danielle Smith.
I want to compare those two, have you compare those two, Kenney and Smith, before our conversation's up. If you're just joining our live stream presented by California Closets, Tyler Dawson's our guest. His new book, The Republic of Alberta, An Idea That Won't Go Away. I highly recommend you buy not just a copy for yourself, but buy several copies for people that need to read it. Like I mentioned, if I can read it in an afternoon, anybody can. We'll put the link to buy it directly into the show notes. Also to let you know that if you're listening to this show the day that we're doing it, which is the 10th of June, this is a Wednesday, Tyler's going to be hanging out with our buddy Denny Parody tonight at Audrey's Books, which we always recommend wherever if you're buying good books in person, you want to support a local business. Nobody does it like Audrey's on Jasper Avenue in downtown Edmonton. 7 o'clock tonight.
7 o'clock tonight.
Reading from the book, signing copies, that kind of a thing.
You got it.
Love it. In our live chat, powered by Park Power, Kenzie says you have no right to call yourself Albertan if you don't think that we have a distinct culture. Dubious says Alberta is full of people who moved here, almost all of us. It's no more unique than anywhere else that everyone moved from. In fact, it's a homogenized version of all of those places. I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't know. Gilles says there is unique culture absolutely in every single province. I guess you could make the argument. You can let us know what you think. If you're listening to this later on the podcast, leave a comment on Spotify or on YouTube. You can always send us an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com. I'm trying to decide whether or not I show you this because it totally derails our interview and has nothing to do with anything. But you brought up Senator Paula Simons.
Yeah.
Johnny, you can show my screen here. This is an email I get from her yesterday out of nowhere. The subject line is AI oops. And so I go, okay. And Senator Simon says, and this, children, is why you should never use AI to research your homework. I don't know why she was searching this, but an AI overview shows that Canadian senator and journalist Paula Simons is married to Edmonton-based writer and creative director Ryan Jespersen. The couple's been married since 1994 and has 2 children, including a daughter.
Well, congratulations.
Wasn't that exciting for me to learn that about myself and Senator Simons? Anyway, shout out to Paula. We'll have to get her back on the show. We're hanging out with Tyler. We've still got about 15 minutes with him, and I want to dig into this. If you have a question for Tyler and you're watching our live stream, you know where to find us. You can leave a comment on any of the 7 social media platforms. Coming up in our next episode of the show, this is going to be the 11th of June on Thursday. Carrie Williams is going to be back in the house from North Road Investment Council. You probably saw the Bank of Canada holding that overnight lending rate 2.25 points. What does that mean? Why does it matter? What's the end game here? Plus all this talk about a technical recession. We reached out to Carrie and Marshall at North Road Investment Council, as I do anytime I have questions about markets or investing, trends, finances, and they said, technical recession, it's not really a word that people use in our industry. They said, why don't we come on the show and talk to real talkers about making sense of markets, about understanding what to look for when we're evaluating trends. We think that's a great idea. So don't miss Carrie Williams. If you're watching us live, it'll be just after 9 o'clock on the 11th of June. And if you're watching it later, you can watch it on demand. If you want to connect directly with North Road Investment Council, with their expert financial planners, investment counsel, digital risk advisory, it is multifaceted offerings. You can find them online at northroadic.com. This is a shout out. A message for business owners, regardless of industry. When you hear about military contracts or the Department of National Defense, you're obviously thinking probably heavy artillery, fighter jets, weapons. You don't manufacture torpedoes, but here's the truth. The DND also buys from like catering firms and cleaning companies and carpenters and branding agencies and hundreds of other everyday businesses. Canada is spending $63 billion on defense this year, and Edmonton businesses are in a position to capitalize on a lot of that. And that's why coming up on the 16th of June, the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce is hosting its first ever Defense Procurement Summit. You have a chance to meet the buyers, get registered, and leave ready to bid. You can learn more by checking out the events link at edmontonchamber.com. That's their first ever Defense Procurement Summit coming up on June 16th. Get the details at edmontonchamber.com. Our friends at the Ranch Golf and Country Club getting set for the Real Talk Golf Classic, the 5th annual, coming up a week from tomorrow. That's right, Thursday, June 18th, in support of the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. We've still got a few tee times available if you have a foursome that wants to get out there in support of a great cause at Edmonton's best damn golf tournament. Make sure you register today by visiting RyanJaspersen.com. Just click on the events link and look for the Real Talk Golf Classic, proudly presented by our friends at Kubi Energy. If you'd like to get out at the ranch before then, don't forget you can book your tee times anytime at theranchgolf.com. And if you're throwing a tournament, make sure you consider the ranch. Nobody does it better, tournament-wise, in the province than our friends at the ranch. And before we get back to Tyler, I just want to make a quick note. If you're going to be flying through Edmonton International anytime soon, if you'll be touching down at or leaving from YEG, you need to take 15 seconds right now and register for YEG Plus. This is Canada's first airport loyalty rewards program, the first one in the country. You can learn more at yegplus.com/realtalk. It couldn't be more simple. Every dollar you spend gets you a point. The more points you get, the more money you save, the more perks you unlock. I mean, one that jumps off the page at me, free parking. How does that sound? Pretty good. Again, you can register today at yegplus.com/realtalk. Make sure the next time you're flying through Edmonton International Airport, you're being rewarded with YEG Plus. Interesting comments here in our live chat. All the good handles are used. I love that handle. Says, where I find the culture difference is in farming communities versus cities. Says topics of conversation are very different. If you're just joining our stream, Tyler Dawson, our guest, has booked The Republic of Alberta, an idea that won't go away. I think that that's a great point, is that there are almost unique cultures. And this just doesn't set Alberta apart from anywhere else. But the urban-rural divide is real. I don't think that it necessarily needs to be divisive. It's obvious that people will have different priorities, different industries. Maybe they're wired a little bit differently. Maybe they raise their families a little bit differently. But there also seems to be, though not exclusively, a rural-urban divide on support for separation as well.
Yeah, there is. There is certainly higher support for separatism in the sort of rural and small-town Alberta. And that comes up in the polling fairly consistently. There are separatists in Alberta's big cities, in Calgary and Edmonton, but there is certainly a higher level of support in rural and small-town Alberta. And, you saw that a little bit when the not Alberta Prosperity Project, because they had that new organization, when the Stay Free Alberta petitioners were going around. I mean, they spent a lot of time in teeny tiny communities all around the province, picking up, a dozen signatures, a couple dozen signatures at a time. It got quite high support in rural Alberta when they were out and about. The Forever Canadian petition, people did that too. I mean, I stopped in at the Torrington Gopher Hole Museum last October.
What a place.
I know, if you've never been, everyone should go.
Wild.
It's fabulous. And there were, the Forever Canadian people were in Torrington collecting signatures. And the day before that, they'd been at the Andrews Garlic Festival. I think there's about 200 people in Andrews. I can't remember which it is now. But anyways, rural Alberta has actually played quite a big role. They've quite a significant part in this story, I think, generally.
Was Pierre Elliott Trudeau's national energy program, was that like the tipping point in a certain direction? Or if you look at like the, kind of the mile markers along the way, or the major moments in this saga, in this story, more than a century long, where does the NEP fit in?
The NEP, I think, permanently altered the relationship between Alberta and Ottawa. And I mean that in terms of government-to-government relationship. I mean that in terms of the way the people of Alberta think about their government in Ottawa. I think it permanently changed things. One of the really interesting things that came up when I was reporting the book is I talked to Senator Paula Simons, and she said, I think people in central Canada don't understand why we're still talking about this. This was 45 years ago. Why are we still talking about the NEP? Its effect on the psyche of Albertans and the political culture here can almost not be overstated. It completely altered the way that Alberta looks at the rest of the country and at Ottawa. this was a policy that seemed to Albertans to be deliberately designed to make them poorer for the benefit of people in central Canada. A massively profoundly impactful piece of policymaking out of Ottawa. And this is about the same time you also see proper separatist organizations stood up. You have the Western Canada Concept, you have the West Fed Association, which is, grown right here in Edmonton by former tractor dealer, I think, Elmer Knutson back in the 1980s. It's really important in the separatist story. It's really important in the story of Alberta's political culture, and it's really important in the story of the way Alberta's government has postured itself towards Ottawa in the decades since.
Peter Lougheed, though, and I think, correct me if you think I'm wrong. I mean, I think he is widely regarded as the best premier in Alberta's history. I don't know if you would.
I think that's probably true. Yeah,
there's other names on the list, but I think when people talk about Lougheed, they do so almost in a spirit of reverence.
Yeah,
there
I
seems
agree.
to be a respect across political lines. You'll often hear people say things like Peter Lougheed would be rolling over in his grave, or he or she is no Peter Lougheed.
Yeah.
He's sort of used as almost a measuring stick in a way. Certainly established a reputation as a formidable lawyer and organizer, and somebody who very effectively fought for Alberta in Ottawa and had demands on behalf of Alberta, but did so in a way I think that was respected across the country and didn't come across as I think some present day prairie fighters are regarded as being scoffed at or laughed at or mimicked or mocked. Now, it helps when you're the premier of Alberta as opposed to an independent organizer, but the spirit of how Lougheed operated and his effectiveness, I think, is relevant for observation, for study, maybe even for mimicking today.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly worked within sort of the it felt like anyways that he worked within the established framework of how Canada works. And, you can contrast that with Premier Danielle Smith, for example, the Alberta Sovereignty Act, one of the very first things she did as premier, which tried to some extent to rupture the sort of gentleman's agreement on how Canada operates by saying we are going to opt out of federal policies that we don't like. That's upping the ante, certainly in a way that I don't think Lougheed ever did. And his approach to defending Alberta during the NEP, his approach to defending provincial interests during the constitutional negotiations, I think are very well regarded right across the country. The historical record, I think, shines pretty gently upon Lougheed.
You, in looking at more recent history, I mean, you even just in your own journalism career and in your own writing career have covered obviously successive Alberta premiers, and it's been very interesting to see how this has flared up. Not just, we talk, I appreciate your book looking through the decades, but looking through recent years, like 2014, really nobody was talking about this.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Justin Trudeau's elected in 2015. Rachel Notley's elected Alberta Premier in 2015. Obviously, politics in Canada and Alberta has turned on its head. That was the year I started at 6:30, Chad. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I was just like, what is going on right now? And then the decade that has followed has been wild. Different premiers have obviously approached it differently, including Jason Kenney versus Danielle Smith. And it's been fascinating for me. I'm sure you've been watching as well to see Kenney, who everybody's kind of wondering what the end game is there. Does he want to lead Canada's Conservatives moving forward? What's his game plan? But Kenney's using his platform and his reputation to fight for Canada, and he's not mincing words, and he's calling separatists out for a number of different things, and using very strong language around it. I think you could say he's condemning the movement and its methods. You can't say the same thing about Danielle Smith. As a matter of fact, it is remarkably different. What do you make of the difference between those successive Alberta premiers?
Yeah, Jason Kenney's on this remarkable redemption tour, I think, on not among people on the right. I think people on the right who saw him ousted as leader of the United Conservatives are still pretty mad at him. But he's going through this redemption tour of people on the left and the center, I think, where they're saying, "Oh my goodness, look at what Jason Kenney's saying about separatism."
It's like George W. Bush.
Yeah, it is in some ways. It's people are saying, "Look, oh my gosh, he's saying exactly what I want someone to be saying," even if they really didn't like him as Premier of Alberta. Really didn't like his handling of COVID, things like that. The main difference. So look, in the last few weeks, Danielle Smith has come out with her strongest statements yet about the separatism thing, and she said, "I am a federalist. I'm going to be campaigning for the Federalist side in this question. I'm not a separatist. That's what she said. You can, I think, ask some pretty reasonable questions about why she behaved the way she did over the past year. If she is a Federalist, why then did she lower the threshold this time last year to make it easier for petitioners to get a referendum question before Albertans? Why did she object to Elections Alberta referring the first separatist question to the courts for analysis? Why did she change the legislation last December to allow the separatists to resubmit their petition? Why did she up the fee required to do a citizen-initiated petition in early January after the separatists had got their question in? Yeah. So, it's a strange situation. She says she's a Federalist. Would she have behaved that differently over the past year if she wasn't a Federalist? And the other thing that I always bring up in these conversations is there's an election next year. Danielle Smith is, whatever the outcome of this referendum question is in October, Danielle Smith is going to have to account for the things that she has done on this file in 2027 when she goes into a provincial election.
I was chatting with some folks. Just, it's funny, as I'm saying this out loud, I'm like doing quick mental math on like how do I not identify people or not betray any trust, because it's very interesting. There's a lot of people right now that have strong opinions on this, but don't want these to be their public opinions. They don't want to be stating this on behalf of their business or their organization or what have you. But a fascinating conversation I had over the weekend with someone who's if there was an Alberta House of Cards, this person would be cast in the show. This is a person on the inside with a great degree of power and influence, not an elected official. And they said to me that they are convinced that there will be a snap election called before the referendum. Which would mean that the writ would have to happen like now.
It would have to happen pretty quick.
It would have to happen within the next few weeks. I can't see it happening personally, but this person has a ton of credibility. This person has worked adjacent to the Alberta legislature since the Klein years. And they're absolutely convinced that this is going to happen. These are the rumblings. These are the ruminations. People sort of curious about where all this posturing is going and what the end game is looking like, or ultimately, in this person's case, how the premier could get herself out of this referendum without having to actually hold it.
Yeah.
Could you see something like that happening?
I would be surprised. I would be surprised, first of all, because no one wants to fight a summer election. No one ever wants to do that. So it would surprise me. The question of how Danielle Smith's going to get out of this corner she finds herself in is a really good one, though. There are some murmurings that the separatists are going to try and oust her as leader of the party, for example, because they're unhappy with the question she's asked.
Yeah, well, they're vowing to. Jeff Rath is vowing to.
Yeah, and it's not a super high bar to do that. They need 22 of 87 constituency associations to sign on to a leadership review. Then they call a meeting and they hold the vote, and that's that. This happened to Jason Kenney, right? It did not take a whole massive amount of effort to cause a lot of problems for Jason Kenney. So could happen again here. I don't know how she gets out of it.
Okay, do we both agree that if Danielle Smith is run out of town as leader of the United Conservatives, as Alberta's premier, by the groups that are vowing to do it, that those groups will look to install an unabashed, openly separatist leader, and the United Conservative Party officially becomes Alberta's separatist option? Like, you're not getting rid of Danielle Smith and then bringing in a moderate that's looking to
Peter Guthrie's not swooping into the leadership.
I don't actually think Guthrie's that moderate, but
fair.
I digress.
Compared perhaps to Mitch Sylvester, he is.
Yeah.
Though.
Yes.
No, I think that's the game plan that some separatists want. Does that happen is a better question. Here's the thing. The polling suggests that maybe a slight majority of United Conservative Party supporters are separatists, closet separatists, of varying degrees of firmness. Lots of people say they're separatists. A lot of people are not really separatists when you really push them on it. There's some polling that's done stress tests, and that number drops to about 10-15% of the population rather than the 30% we tend to see in polling. That's probably true of the United Conservative Party as well. So there are a lot of Federalists within this party. There are also a lot of Federalists within this party who are extremely well organized, who have extremely deep roots. These are the people that organized for Jason Kenney. These are the people that organized for Jim Prentice, for Alison Redford, Ralph Klein. These guys are still involved in the party, and they may not be on the ascendant in terms of the sort of group that joined the party sort of post-COVID and are now really influential, but they have deep roots and deep connections and could mobilize support, could sign up new members. It is not particularly hard, I don't think, to get to a leadership review of Premier Danielle Smith. I think it's very hard for the separatists to fully take over the party and transform it into a separatist party. That would be a difficult task, I think. Possible, but difficult.
I feel like I could talk to you about this for 3 hours. I know you have to roll, and we've got Dominic Cardy ready to go here. We're going to kind of carry on and continue this conversation around Alberta separatism from a different angle, from a different lens. But I know that people will be able to pick your brain tonight. This is the 10th of June we're talking, 7 o'clock at Audrey's Books. But I just have to ask you this in closing, Tyler. The Republic of Alberta is the title of the book. Mm-hmm. What do you call it, like a subheading or a subtitle? What do you call it? An idea that won't go away?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The idea that this won't go away, or maybe the fact that this is an idea that won't go away, I think is disconcerting for a lot of people that will say, well, if the referendum indicates this October that we're going to have a binding referendum, we're going to spend another $50 million or whatever it's going to cost, and then whatever. And let's say we're on the path to Alberta separating, Alberta leaving Canada, whether or not people think that's realistic or not, then it's obviously not going away because that's the new reality. But even if the separation initiative, even if separatists are soundly defeated in October, if it's like 80-20 in favor of staying in Canada, they're not going to change their mind. It's not going to go away. I mean, at the end of the day, how does this all end? Or is this just a story that continues to write itself?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why we're in the situation we are now is because of the way that Premier Danielle Smith and her party have accepted some of this talk in a way that has not been accepted within mainstream conservative circles in the past. An extremely humiliating defeat for the separatists, I think, probably allows the old sort of state of affairs to reemerge, for it to no longer be sort of allowed in polite conversation. The Overton window, as political scientists call it, shifts back a little bit to what we saw in the past, where it was strictly fringe lunatics talking about separatism. I think that's a possibility of a very humiliating defeat for the separatists. I think there is the possibility that various policy changes, a new pipeline to the West Coast, for example, sort of eats into the sort of soft separatist support. These people who are maybe going to vote for separatism to send a message to Ottawa, but are not outright separatists no matter what. Some policy changes from Ottawa, some wins, growth in the Alberta economy, that certainly could aid in tamping down the sentiment. And when you remove a certain segment of that separatist population and it goes back to just being a smaller group of sort of malcontents, it's going to naturally lose power. The other possibility is this backfires spectacularly on Danielle Smith. She loses next year's election, the NDP is in power, and all of a sudden all these separatists have something totally different to be angry about. Part of the reason, I don't want to run over time here, but part of the reason why we have such an influential separatist movement right now is because the people who protested Rachel Notley's farm bill in 2015, the people who protested immigration law rules in 2018, 2019, Bill C-68, Bill C-69, C-48, C-69, sorry, the people who protested COVID, there's this right-wing protest culture that has developed in Canada in the last 10 years and developed in Alberta in the last 10 years. These people need something to continue to motivate them. They have found community, they have found friends, they have found purpose through this. They have moved seamlessly through some of these issues. Alberta separatism does not need to be the final thing that they are mad about. They can move on to something else and separatism falls to the wayside. And the head Nenshi government in 2027 in Alberta, that gives this group of people something else to focus on, and then perhaps separatism fades into the background once again.
Yeah. You've opened up a can, and I have so many questions
I know,
now,
sorry about that.
But we can't. We're going to have to bring you back. Will you come back?
I would love to come back.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to have you back. Congratulations on the book. I
Thank
don't
you.
recommend anything to this audience that would be a waste of your time. You know, if I'm recommending that you pick up a book and read it, that I actually mean it. This is The Republic of Alberta, an idea that won't go away. It's written by Tyler Dawson. You can check it out at sutherlandhousebooks.com. We'll link to that in the show notes, and you can also find Tyler, get a signed copy, hear him read a little bit from it. I'm assuming you're going to read a bit from it tonight. Maybe answer some questions.
Certainly. Yeah, if you've got questions, bring them out. I'd love to answer
Fantastic. Hey, let them know you heard about him on Real Talk when you visit him at Audrey's Books tonight on Jasper Avenue. That's at 7 o'clock. Tyler, thanks for doing this, man. Great
My
job
pleasure.
on the book. Totally appreciate
very
it.
much.
We should get a couple of more comments in here before, Tony's one who says, are there any moderates left in the UCP? Tony, there has to be. There has to be. I mean, it's a fair question, and maybe they should let their presence be known. But there has to be, right? I mean, the leaders' dinner down in Calgary last weekend wasn't bonkers. Ambustion says Alberta is unique, but separation ain't it. The best Albertans I've known worked their asses off, and they didn't make excuses like this lot of complainers. which is an interesting comment as well. I'll get to more of your comments as the show goes on. Dominic Cardy's got a lot to say about this as well. M. Aitken says when the separatists lose the referendum, they're only going to get angrier. And I saw a comment from Randy, which I thought was really good. Randy Thunderhorse, who says, you know, they didn't run Jason Kenney out of Edmonton. They didn't run Jason Kenney out of the legislature because he was a bad premier. They ran him out because he wasn't bad enough. Interesting food for thought from Randy. More on Alberta's separation, one of the top stories in Canadian politics in just a moment. But why don't we take like a 2-minute breather before we get to Dominic Cardy? Hey, every Wednesday, it's strategically positioned on hump day, the middle of the week. We take you out to the mountains. We take you out to Jasper for a deep breath of fresh air. For a reminder that it's not all about politics and policy. And if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the best memories in any national park in Canada, they're going to be made in Jasper. They're MyJasper Memories. Every week here on the show, presented by our friends at Tourism Jasper. This week, we want to talk to you about an amazing company, an amazing opportunity. This is something you have to try the next time you're in Jasper. This is Jasper Social Cycle. How great is this? The party with pedals. There's something new rolling through the streets of Jasper, and my face just explodes in a smile when I see the photos here that Johnny's showing us. This is part bike, this is part patio, and this is fully unforgettable, that's for sure. This is a pedal-powered social tour that includes music, drinks, local stories, and as you can see, you are surrounded by mountain views the entire time as well. This is such a neat opportunity. This is a locally owned, family-driven business that was created with one simple idea: bring people together in a way that feels fun and effortless and unforgettable. The organizers of the Jasper Social Cycle had one simple idea. Okay, bring people together, right? Not just another tour, a shared experience where the ride itself becomes the highlight. Something that, of course, is energizing, something that feels like Jasper. And, well, if you've been to Jasper, you know what that means, right? It just feels like Jasper. So they've got different tours with different times and different themes, different vibes. They've got the Joyride Happy Hour, which is a high-energy, non-stop social cycle experience through town. And then you've got the Rise and Grind. I love this idea. This is the morning social cycle where they've got coffee and pastry samples going on there as well. So you can obviously get your day started, get your morning started off in the right place. And then they've also got their pedals and patios, which is a super cool idea as well. This is an opportunity to cruise through Jasper, like not just stop at one place. The social cycle is going to take you all through the mountain town, and then they're going to hop off at different hand-picked local patios. This is like a pub crawl elevated, big time, to enjoy curated tastings and good company. I'm loving this. The Jasper Social Cycle, want to let you know you can follow them on Instagram at Jasper Social Cycle. It's going to take you 2 seconds to convince yourself you need to do this when you see the smiles on the faces of the people that are participating, and when you see the views that they're enjoying, the experience that they're having. I don't think that there's a better rolling patio anywhere in the country. And Jasper Social Cycle is doing just an incredible job establishing themselves early as a must-visit mountain park experience in the beautiful town of Jasper. You can learn more by following them on Instagram at Jasper Social Cycle. And don't forget, of course, you can visit Tourism Jasper's official website for everything you need to know as you're planning your Jasper getaway, including things to do, where to stay, different ways you can discover Jasper. There's great history lessons there on the website. And then, of course, trip planning resources. Find inspiration for your next visit at jasper.travel. And when you visit Jasper, we'd love to see your memories. If you're posting on Instagram in particular, hashtag MyJasper and Real Talk RJ, and your family's memories could be featured in a future episode of the show. Proudly presented by Tourism Jasper is MyJasper Memories, Wednesdays, right here. Johnny Infamous, you and I are going to have to get on one of those Jasper Social Cycles.
I don't know.
You're just going to do the drinking and let me do the paddling?
I will go on it. That's for sure. I love those things, but don't look to me for pedaling. I'm going to have my feet up.
You see those and then you realize like they've got to be able to drive them to the pickup location. I'm like, these things have to be able to drive. Can you just take a few minutes away from the pedaling? I think you probably can. Let's get to Dominic Cardy. You know Dominic. He's a leader of the Canadian Future Party, but a former New Brunswick cabinet minister. He's certainly one of Canada's most outspoken voices on democratic institutions, political polarization, and national unity. Look no further than a recent piece he's published at nationalnewswatch.com. We'll link to it in the show notes so you can read the entire piece itself. But Dominic argues that Alberta's separation question threatens us all. This is a warning to the country as a whole. Dominic warns that there's legitimate frustrations over energy policy, Ottawa's treatment of Alberta, but they're being exploited. He joins us now to explain why he believes Alberta's separation debate is far more consequential than most Canadians probably think. Welcome back to the show, my man. It's been a while since we've seen you.
It's great to be back on. Thanks for having me. I'm sad it's about such a divisive issue right now, but hey, that's politics in the 2020s.
I know. And I would say, like, to people, when you and I have had a chance to meet in person and when we've had a chance to speak in past interviews, there's been, I know that you've never been afraid to call a spade, and you've never been afraid to call people out where you see that they need it. But I feel like you've always sort of endeavored to have positive conversations about the direction of politics in Canada. But every once in a while, you got to sound the alarm. You got to wave the red flag. And that's what you're doing in this one.
Well, yeah, because right now we're at risk of losing the country because we're having a conversation that's not based on reality. That, in between the folks who are pushing for independence, whether it's in Quebec or Alberta or anywhere else in Canada, we're having a totally unrealistic set of proposals being put forward with no details behind them, real evidence of foreign interference in some cases as well. And none of this is going to help get Alberta energy to tidewater. None of it's going to help fix our country's problems. None of it's going to help us deal with the institutional crises that Canada's democracy are facing. And so we've got to get away from this sterile back and forth between the somewhat crazy extremists saying that all we can do here is rip the country down, and then too often very complacent elites in Ottawa saying, well, everything's fine. We'll just spend a bit more money here and there, have another commission or task force. We are facing the loss of our democracy, not just in Canada, but around the Western world. And that's in part because the Democrats have totally lost their spine. That where are the folks coming out and saying, this country is the best place to live? We have got so many challenges, absolutely, but you know how we fix them? Citizens with rights that our forefathers fought for. We have the chance to make this country better if we wanted to. But what we're really falling into now is just seeing even more of this imported American narratives dominating our politics. And the longer we let that happen, the more we risk our country becoming just a plaything for other bigger, more powerful countries, while we still have to get our own act together, build up our own defenses, and make sure we can stand and compete in a more dangerous world.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time telling stories because we're here in this interview to hear from you. But I will let you know, I had just the immense honor of traveling down to my hometown of Calgary this past weekend and hosting the Juno Beach Center's first ever gala. So they've been around for 23 years. This is Canada's wartime museum on Juno Beach in Normandy. Like, this is an incredible place. They've never had a fundraising gala before. And it was held at the CPKC. It's like a museum. It's like the Canadian Pacific Rail Museum in Calgary, but it's not open to the public. So it's just this, I promise I'll be quick, Dominic, but you walk into this facility that's not open to the public, and there's a huge steam locomotive down the one side, and then there's these 3 rail cars down the other side, and they tell me, I'm there early, I'm hosting, so I'm there to do my sound check and everything, and they say, have a walk through these rail cars, and they said, but just before you get in there, we need you to know what you're stepping into. They said, this is not a replica, these are not cars just like, they says these are the actual rail cars that Sir Winston Churchill, FDR, then President of the United States, and William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Prime Minister of Canada at the time, traveled on together in 1943 en route to Quebec City, basically to plan D-Day, or at least to get consensus that these nations were going to fight together and that D-Day had to happen. And I get these chills, man. And I'm walking up one of these rail cars. I shot video of it. I'll post it on my Instagram this week. And it's like, this is in theory. Like, I remember even holding the handrail, climbing up the stairs. I'm like, Winston Churchill held this handrail. He probably smoked a cigar on this back. It's crazy to think about. And then all these these proud Canadian veterans. Marty Jones was there, Dominic. He's 101 years old. He fought. He was a gunner. He was there on D-Day. I mean, wild. And then you have Canadian veterans from, from Afghanistan, people that served in Bosnia. Like, the room is full of, I mean, it was just such a powerful room to be in, and celebrating the sacrifice and honoring the sacrifice that Canadian men and women have made over the decades. And, Alberta separation, it didn't come up from the podium. I think that would have been inappropriate and weird. But it was sprinkled into almost every conversation that I was privy to that night. And seeing the Canadian flags everywhere and hearing these veterans talk about Canada and the legacy and the history of Canada, why they're proud to be Canadian. And these are Alberta veterans, by the way. I left that event that night just with more resolve than I've had in past around this. And that's saying something, because I was motivated before. But hearing from those veterans and talking about what Canada has brought to the world and what Canada means to the world and what Alberta means as part of Canada was just incredibly powerful.
And I think it's that kind of conversation about our history that can help us get through this present moment and help us build a stronger country for the future. Because one of the problems we've got is we've become afraid of talking about too many elements of our history. And that makes people frustrated, and then opens the door for the weirdos, bluntly, to say, look, the reason why you can't talk about these things is because they don't want you to. That's nonsense. We live in a free country. We can talk about what we want. And the last thing that we should be doing is letting our elites tell us that we can't call out the weirdos for being weird and trying to rip our country down. So the only thing where I disagree with you on from your statement about that opening and that evening is we should be calling out separatism and other nonsense from public spaces, from public stages. Because otherwise, how do people know that people who are in positions of authority, which is, like it or not, and again, the loonies like to try and imagine a world that has no structures, while at the same time they spin the messages of countries that have the most top-down government structures ever. They like to talk about freedom and no one being told what to do, blah, blah, blah. But how on earth did we end up in the position in this country where the prime ministers, I lead another party. I've never voted for the federal Liberals in my life. But when you take the fairly mild elbows up slogan, and rather than the opposition to elbows up being how much harder do we put up our elbows, when do we put our fists up? Instead, it's elbows down. And that's where we've got to get back, I think, on track and start saying that the acceptable discourse around normal politics can't be including folks who are saying they want to rip our country down. And when they do, we need to stand up with the same righteous anger that our veterans did when they stormed the beaches at Juneau and say to those folks, absolutely not on our watch, that we are not going to let our country be ripped apart by folks who have got nothing better to offer. Because the separatist movements, they've got some valid points around, in Quebec and Alberta, around how much resources they get, attention from Ottawa, whatever. But you don't solve those problems by shredding the country. And we've shown that Canada can be adaptable, can be flexible. And one of the things my party is trying to do in the context of this debate is let's put some numbers around this conversation. Because there's a lot of talk about, with the Clarity Act, about what do you need for a successful referendum? And by leaving it vague, we just leave the space open for the extremists to dominate the debate by saying, oh, well, we didn't get that, but we should have. It's just been one more point, we would have won. Rigging and whatever else. We know we're going to hear all of those sort of nonsensical calls. We need to be really clear that you need to rip up our country a 2/3 majority of the vote. You don't get elected with 50% plus one. You get elected by winning more votes than another candidate under our system. If you want to change our constitution, it requires 7 provinces, all of their legislatures voting to approve a change. Plus, those provinces have to represent 50% plus one of the population. So to make it a slightly higher standard for ripping up the country, then we would have to pass, say, a municipal bylaw, I think makes all kinds of sense and allows us, again, to take the fight back to the extremists on the left and the right, trying to rip us apart by saying, no, we got a system here that, for all of its flaws, works when Canadians take it over and use it. It doesn't work when we have a little comfortable group of folks in Ottawa who think they have a permanent right to be in power and make decisions that are sometimes disconnected, increasingly disconnected from what Canadians need. But it equally doesn't come from folks who've got absolutely no alternatives apart from burn it all down. And I'm not going to stand here as someone who was an immigrant to Canada. My folks were born in England. Your stories about the folks at Juneau Beach, my parents, when they were kids, Belfast and Newcastle, were bombed by the Nazis and had relatives who fought in the services to defend democracy. Most Canadians have got stories like that. We're not going to let that story of Western civilization in its most positive and expansive form be taken over by a handful of folks who are manipulating the very tools that our societies were unique in having invented. The right to free speech, to share information, to talk and organize openly. They've got access to those tools, but so do we. And it's time we started using them and pushing back. Because in this referendum, folks like me, folks like you, we're all operating in professions that have regulations attached to them. Political parties have to be incredibly careful about what they say, reporting every donation that comes in, operating under real restrictions. Some of the folks operating on the referendum file are operating with no restrictions at all. We're already seeing clear evidence of foreigners pretending to be Albertans, ramping up division in Canada. We've seen the huge data leak with 3 million Albertans having their personal info shared inappropriately, illegally. We've got to start being tougher and calling this stuff out. 10 years ago, any one of those stories would have been headlines for weeks. But now, because of this constant barrage of craziness, we lose the ability to focus and we lose the ability to push back. And it's in that chaos that the extremists think they can win, by dividing us all. So we got to get back, focus. And here I am, a New Brunswick politician, saying to the folks in Alberta, you are loved as part of this country. Your province is appreciated. It has not been treated with the respect that it deserved, as is the case for many other parts of Canada, regions within provinces as well as provinces. So how do we fix that? We go to Ottawa and we make the changes that we want. We argue about them. Not just my party. Canadian Future Party is putting ideas on the table as a little startup, but push your MPs, push the candidates for any party you support. Ask them what they're going to concretely do to save this country right now. And on the question of the referendum, again, what I'm asking for is a clear majority. The Clarity Act says a clear majority for a clear question. In Alberta, we don't have a clear question, and we don't have any definition from the government about what a clear majority would be. We're putting an idea on the table. Let's argue about numbers rather than emotions, and let's stop ourselves being caught up in fights that have nothing to do about making Canadian life more affordable, this country better, more filled with opportunity, and sadly about just fulfilling the divisive agenda of our enemies, both here in Canada against broadly Western democratic civilization, and around the world with the autocrats who are trying to manipulate and divide us the same way they are the Europeans and the Americans and everyone else.
We're talking to Dominic Cardy, leader of the Canadian Future Party, in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. You can check out the CanadianFutureParty.ca to learn more about what they're doing, take a look at policy, dig into what Dominic and the team there is doing. We'll have that in the show notes for you conveniently. I got to circle back, and I mean, I want to touch on basically your indictment of the federal government and what you would do differently in a moment. But first, for people that may not have read your piece in National Newswatch, I want to read just the first couple of sentences. Maybe it's weird for you, Dominic, to have your writing read back to you. But I want to. It's powerful stuff, and it begins with, as a former prisoner of war outlined to us in our studio about a month ago. This was just a remarkable guy that had been captured by the Russians while fighting for Ukraine. He says this is the largest land war, post-World War II land war in history, and nobody's talking about it because they're talking about Donald Trump, though. This guy was just outraged at the lack of attention on Ukraine right now, what's happening with Russia. But you're right. In 2014, Russia began its assault on Ukraine using disinformation and manufactured separatism in the Donetsk region. The playbook was clear. Stoke local grievance, some with at least a thin connection to reality, create the illusion of grassroots support, manufacture and amplify the fiction of a persecuted people wanting out. You say what followed was not independence, but 8 years of war, full-scale invasion in 2022, and now the deaths of hundreds of thousands. You say we're watching chapter 1 of that same playbook unfold in Alberta. That's when you had my full attention. You say Danielle Smith's government is allowing the spread of a separation movement built on manufactured ambiguity, just as the Ukrainian government failed to take the threat seriously 12 years ago. Now, some people may say, well, that's a little dramatic, Dominic, but take us into it and what you think people need to be focusing more closely on.
Sure, it is dramatic, but one of the things that humans are really bad at is noticing when the world around us gets dramatic. We're really good at waking up in the morning and going, yeah, sun came up, probably going to be a day pretty much like yesterday. What we're talking about with Miss Smith is very similar to what happened with David Cameron, the then Prime Minister of England, who fell into the Brexit referendum. in exactly the same way that Ms. Smith has fallen into this one. Not particularly clear what his personal views were, but felt that the only way he could ride the tiger of, in that case, Brexit sentiment in his party, Ms. Smith, separatist sentiment in hers, was trying to sort of walk this very, very, very thin line without much success. So first, you've got bluntly cowardly politicians who won't stand up and defend democracy. Next, you've got bad actors who are trying to manipulate and use local grievances for their own goals. It's not a surprise that we see some of these folks connected to the Alberta movement, independence movement, going down to Washington and hanging out with some of Trump's people. We're delusional if we think that the discussion around Alberta independence isn't somehow linked to Mr. Trump's 51st state comments, especially given that we know that the one person in the entire world who Mr. Trump seems to look up to, although he might be adding another person to that list because he seems to have a newfound love for Chairman Xi from China, unfortunately. But before that, there was his one true love, Vladimir Putin. And it would be very odd if the circle of people around Mr. Trump who are admirers of Mr. Putin and his methods weren't looking at replicating them. We're certainly seeing that replicated publicly in many, many ways. A much more aggressive unilateral approach from the US, abandoning its post-war leadership role. But in concrete terms here in Canada, we are seeing folks connected with the American Republican Party interfering in Canadian elections. As I said, they can do it nearly without limit because of social media. So social media creates this narrative around the issues in Alberta, which, again, to repeat, those issues are real. It's the solutions that are surreal and dangerous. But in Ukraine, we saw the next step of that movement was faked elections and rigged elections and a lot of other ever more serious breaking of the rules. And so when we see things like the Alberta referendum starting off with that data breach and 3 million Albertans or more having their personal information inappropriately shared, you can see we're already going down that same direction. And I'm not saying this to be, first off, not to be fear-mongering, because again, I think we need to maybe wake up. And as you said, your last guest had pointed out, we have got right now an enormous land war in Europe. I met with a Taiwanese diplomat in Montreal about 2 weeks back. She had a very good question for me. Canada gives a lot of money to support Ukraine. Why on earth are we also setting up a new partnership with China, who are the largest funder of Russia's war in Ukraine? So we're operating in this kind of fluffy 1990s world where everything's going to be okay and the West is in charge and our institutions just work. And we've forgotten that we have to do active, ongoing maintenance to save and protect democracy, even when it's not under threat. And when it is under aggressive attack by opponents of democracy, both within the country and abroad. First, I mean, it's nice that Canada's getting attention, I guess, but we're getting attention in part because we are large, resource-rich, and largely isolated from our allies, except for the US, who we cannot count on right now. So if we are going to be serious about pushing back on this, it's going to need an all-hands-on-deck approach from every single person who believes in Canada, believes in our history and our future, and who sees our challenges as things that can be overcome, for us to say absolutely clearly that separatism is no solution, that the separatist movement is a parasitic movement trying to feed off of the grievances of Albertans that are totally justified, not to help them, but to advance their own goals. And I say the same thing about separatists in Quebec, and I say the same thing about separatists in any country in the liberal democratic world, small L liberal democratic world, who are trying to rip apart successful small L liberal democratic countries in pursuits of their own goals. So if we want to have a country that's based on, let's get back to being proud of these things: reason, evidence, science, success, prosperity, caring for the people who live next to us, but making sure we have structures that are always pushing us to advance. If we want that, we better start talking about it rather than operating this constant rearguard defensive operation where one day we're appeasing anti-vaxxers, the next day we're appeasing separatists. What's next? Are we going to be starting to say that flat earthers have a valid perspective? We need to talk about getting Alberta resources to Tidewater. That's a complex question in a democracy, and it needs people to be engaged, and we're not talking about it because we're wasting time on this sort of divisive nonsense that ultimately causes people to get much more excited and click a lot more on social media, giving more money to our favorite tech bros, but is doing absolutely nothing to prepare us for a world where the Chinese are busy taking over, the Americans are going through a period of chaos, and we are trying to figure out our place. We don't have much time to figure that out. And if we can't at least agree that evidence, science, and reason should be the basis for our democracy, then we're going to be swamped by these guys anyway. But I don't believe that's what Canadians want. I know it's not what Albertans want. They've shown that hard work can lead to success. So I've got no doubt that that same approach to hard work will be put to work in building up the party, building up Canada by emphasizing the strong role of Alberta. And certainly what I'm asking my members in Alberta to do, because it's an area we've got good strength, is get out there and get involved. And I say that to anyone who believes in Canada. Please, saying this from New Brunswick, I'm looking forward to coming out and helping out if I can, not to be some outsider being pushy, but to say your province is appreciated. Again, there are grievances across this country. Let's talk about how we fix them. And as someone who sat in cabinet and argued about why we needed a west-east pipeline for years and years, we've got lots to talk about. So let's start those conversations about how we build rather than arguing about the mechanism for our own destruction.
Dominic Cardy's our guest, leader of the Canadian Future Party. Interesting in our live chat here, Dubious is loving what you're putting down, says great points from Dominic. Meantime, Kyle says, a guy who isn't from here trying to lecture us, get out of here. He's not loving it.
I am from here, Kyle. We are Canadians.
Yeah.
I am a Canadian. I have the same passport as you. We share the same passport. I am not going to be told by folks from Alberta, Ontario, Newfoundland, or the Northwest Territories that I am not going to be able to participate in a debate about the future of my country. And that does not mean disrespecting Albertans, because disrespecting Albertans is what got us here. But if those of us who stand up for Canada feel afraid to stand up for Canada because we're pushed back by arguments like that, then we're toast.
Well, I totally agree, Dominic, and you're making a point that's a very important one, and we've made this point on the show, I hope, as a recurring theme through any conversation about Alberta separation, that this is not exclusively an Alberta issue. This is a Canada issue, and the rest of Canada is not going to sit and watch this unfold without having opinions on it. The thing about separatists, Dominic, in Alberta is that they want everybody not from Alberta to basically shut the fuck up until they don't want them to, until they want them to speak up about Alberta and show respect to Alberta and provide concessions to Alberta and invest in Alberta. So it's like they'll tell you when they want to hear from you, right? And that's kind of it's a little bit incongruous.
It's toddler politics.
Yeah.
It's toddler politics. It's the same politics we saw in Brexit. We don't want those EU regulations, but we do want the market access. And they didn't realize that they were going to lose both. And so instead of reforming the EU from within, Britain lost billions and billions of pounds. Exactly the same with the Quebec separatists. I remember going to Montreal in 1995 for the big rally there for Canada, and there were separatists there yelling at us and telling us that we weren't wanted because we were not from there. Canada exists. It stretches from the Pacific to the Arctic to the Atlantic, and it is not going to change its borders unless Canadians decide that. And that's a conversation for all of Canada. And so it's really important that people go into referendum campaigns knowing what the stakes are, because there's always that danger. I think the Bloc Québécois has done this. They've stopped being the party really of independence, and they're just the party that has no other job but to stand up for Quebec interests. It is likely that we're going to see something similar emerging, sort of a reform version 2, I imagine, out of this independence movement in Alberta. The problem then is, at which point, when you've got multiple pseudo-independence movements across the country, when do you lose your country? And the reason why we're seeing more and more of those movements is because we're not seeing that level of strength and force being applied on the pro-Canada side. That we have got to stop playing games with these folks and stop treating them, because like you said, they end up by claiming the mantle of being speakers for Alberta because they claim this is what Alberta wants, and we've fallen in Canada into the bad habit of offering respect to every single opinion, no matter how nonsensical. And so those guys allow themselves to present themselves as the leaders of a movement. They're not the leaders of a movement. Mr. Rath is not the leader of anything, as far as I can tell, except for maybe he's got a receptionist at his law firm. But these guys are able to make those claims because folks like us have let them. And at some point, we got to just say, just no. You're not able to claim this. You represent no one. Like Mr. Rath, you go down to the State Department and meet in secure facilities. Normal countries, that would be considered treason. You are not an elected official. You speak for no group. You have no right to speak for any group. Miss Smith does. She was elected. We can fight about her decisions all day and argue about them, but she has the right to speak for Alberta. These other guys need to be told to step back and let democracy work, because otherwise they go on about freedom and elites and all the rest. But what can be more anti-freedom and more elite-driven than having random people gaining influence purely because of the cash they can deploy coming from sources that are unknown to manipulate free speech on social media platforms and using the free press? There is nothing free about that. And that's certainly not a future that Albertans want, which is why Alberta independence is massively unpopular. That we got to keep talking about that. And that's no insult to Albertans. It's Albertans see through this nonsense. Across here in New Brunswick, we've got a handful of people who support Atlantic independence, and there have been movements in Cape Breton and Newfoundland and other places. Those movements don't go anywhere because they are not supported by normal people. This one is getting amplified because Alberta has had more attention around its grievances with Ottawa and the rest of the country for very good reason, but also because it's easier to influence a separatist movement in Canada where they all speak English like you do. In terms of the folks coming up from the States, right?
Who's going to be left,
really
man? Who's going to be left? We've got Alberta independence, and then now we're hearing Saskatchewan's musing about it. Manitoba, apparently, the Atlantic provinces. Who's going to be left? The huge irony is that Quebec's been wanting to, not Quebec, I shouldn't say that generally speaking, but there have been some Quebecers that have been wanting to leave forever. But at the end of the day, Quebec's going to be the only one left in Canada. They'll have gotten what they wanted.
And that's the part that's so crazy with us, right? But again, comes back to we've got to just reframe this debate, and why this in the reason for our interview today, talking about my party's position on needing a supermajority to break up Canada. You put that on the table, suddenly everyone knows what they're dealing with, and suddenly wasting your time on an independence project becomes a lot less appealing because you can tell that you're just not going to get there.
Yeah.
And most of our peer countries don't allow secessionist movements at all under any circumstances. The U.S. had a bad experience with that back in the day. Most of European neighbors have had similar issues. So the fact that we have this entrenched, okay, that was a decision made by previous governments and by a Supreme Court a number of years ago. But let's make it clear what the costs are for trying to break up Canada. Because otherwise, like you said, we're going to end up by just being a collection of grievance industries for provinces and with no national identity. But that, again, comes back to another area where the folks on the populist right have got a point. What is Canada's national identity? We stopped talking about that. We've become afraid of the idea of saying that certain things are good and certain things are bad. Yeah, I make no hesitation in saying that my party stands forcefully against radical Islamism as it does against radical Christianity, that we need to get radical politics out of our politics and get back to talking about getting things done. And until we can have a conversation about building a national identity around what Canada stands for, which to my mind is those core democratic values, freedom of speech, freedom of association, the basic package of freedoms that we are so lucky to have that most people still don't around the world, make it clear that we're super proud of our history. And we're also proud of the way that we handled the sins in our country's history by talking about them, by admitting when we screwed things up, as you see people admitting they screwed up over the residential graves stories the last couple of weeks. That is how we build. That's how we make our country a stronger part of the Western democratic space, not by abandoning everything that made the Western democratic space a good one to live in, which is ultimately what so many of the ultra right-wing populists want to do. And so do the ultra left ones. They're just so disorganized, no one even pays attention to them much.
I want to ask you about I got to ask you about the changing political dynamic in Canada and the Avi Lewis-led NDP and you and what you're starting up. And I will before we wrap. But I got to get this because I want to stay focused because I know as soon as we talk about that, we're going to go off. But you've got a fellow New Brunswicker checking in here. Pongy says, Dominic, it's so nice to see another New Brunswicker speaking up. Says, we know what it's like to be ignored down here. That from Pongy. Meantime, Cassandra's not sold. She says, oh, BS, saying Alberta's not been treated fairly by Canada. It's such crap, says Cassandra. Now, in this interview, you've described the feds. You've described Mark Carney's government as complacent and disconnected, Dominic. But you've acknowledged that Alberta, you think, does have legitimate complaints about federal energy policy or how it's been treated in past. What grievance do you think that Ottawa has most poorly mishandled? And if you were elected prime minister, what would you most do differently than what Mark Carney is doing right now? I'm not as interested in hearing about Justin Trudeau. We hear about him a lot in Alberta right now. He's not the prime minister anymore. He's making out with Katy Perry and he's on the world lecture circuit. Mark Carney's the one calling the shots. Mark Carney's the one making the policy. What would you do differently?
So first, the energy file is the obvious one, that projects that were ignored for many, many years. And I think that Mr. Carney deserves credit for talking about them, but where is the action? And the most obvious solution is a west-east pipeline. We're talking about things that unite grievances across the country. Here in Atlantic Canada, here in my province, we have an oil refinery right here. We have a strong interest in helping Alberta out and getting its energy to tidewater so we can get it to Europe so they don't need Russian oil and gas so we can fight to save democracy. It should be a no-brainer. That is the sort of thing where Mr. Carney has enough of the mandate right now that I wish he would go and use it. And something else, so an area you said, areas where I differ, if I'd been in Mr. Carney's position and inherited the minority that he won, and then you had the success that he's had over the last year in convincing Canadians that he's trying to make things better, why didn't he go for an election? The polls show very clearly that he would have won a plurality, if not a majority of seats in Alberta if the election was held right now. But the reason for that's obvious. He's not going to go for an election because he wants to leave Mr. Poilievre in place, because as long as Mr. Poilievre is in place, the Conservative Party is essentially neutralized as a viable alternative to Mr. Carney's team. So things like that, where we've got a government now that is back in the European mainstream. I would say that, like Mr. Starmer, Mr. Mertz, Mr. Carney, Mr. Macron, they can all hang out together. They've got similar backgrounds, experiences, social networks. None of those guys have any plan for what is coming down the pipe towards the democracies in the next couple of years, with a combination of the misinformation being driven by autocracies, China's explicit plans, again, a country we've just signed a strategic partnership with that has millions of people in concentration camps, is committing multiple genocides according to our own parliament, and we just signed a new strategic accord with them. Make that make sense. We have a blindness, I think, to the danger in the world and how the world is no longer being run by the Western democracies. So my big change would be, I would put Canada on a defensive war footing, that we need to be prepared for a conflict that's going to come, that is going to define this next decade, but it's, I would guess, going to define the next 100 years. Combination of AI, where experts in that field are saying that within the last few months, we've reached the point that AI is at human levels of intelligence. With exponential growth, that's only going to change and become a more radical transformation of our society. And some of those people say it will be the biggest transformation, forget about since the Industrial Revolution. They're saying it's going to be the biggest change since we invented agriculture. So huge changes. And what's our solution? Asking us to give our money to, or give our private information to corporations so they can tell that we're not 16 based on the plan that's coming out today. So a plan that respects Canadians is what my party would offer in contrast to Mr. Carney. And I don't mean that as a rhetorical line. I mean saying, first of all, we're going to respect provincial jurisdiction. None of this stuff with overlapping programs where the feds pretend to be a province. I dealt with that when I was education minister here and had to deal with the childcare program. So respecting provincial jurisdiction, getting the federal government to do its bloody job, which in the case of programs like energy is to get things actually moving, reducing regulatory burdens. It's insane that we have gone through how many years now with the intra-provincial trade barriers in place that, depending on who you talk to, that was eating between 3 and 7% of our GDP. Multiple recessions that we've had over the last 40 or so years would not have been recessions if we had had that extra economic kick by not having those barriers weighing us down and holding us back. And those barriers hurt the stronger provinces even more. So for Albertans, should be a huge issue. And there still hasn't been enough movement on that. A bunch of things my party proposed last year, the Liberals did pick up on, changing medical licenses and stuff like that for doctors, all good. But the changes are so huge. And the Liberal Party is an establishment party. And they are too tied in to existing structures with ethnic voting blocks. That means that they are very quick to condemn fundamentalist Christians, very slow to condemn fundamentalist Muslims. Personally, I think the extremism is the problem, not the religion. They have been very quick to talk about defending democracy in Europe, entirely uninterested when it comes to making partnerships with countries like China. So we need a much more hard-edged, hard-assed democratic force that pushes to defend what we have, be proud of it, and hit back hard against the complacent folks in the center and the radical people on the extremes who are both playing their own destructive roles in this shadow theater that's slowly ripping our country apart.
I should let you know, Dominic, before we wrap, there's just a ton of people that are grateful for what you're bringing to the table today. Your points are resonating with them. I think if you or a member of your team is watching our live chat here, powered by Park Power, generally speaking, I think you'll be pleased with the feedback. Here's the rub. Here's the rub. Trying to get a new political party off the ground is tough. It's a tough row to hoe. And you just talked about establishment political parties, and you talk about complacency. And I know neither of us would mean this in a spirit to insult our fellow Canadians, but oftentimes politically we are a little complacent. You got to work pretty hard to get somebody to care. And when somebody does care, they probably care to cheer for the team that they've cheered for forever. I'm not saying that people never change their vote. I'm not saying you can't find new members, but man, it's a tough gig trying to get a party like the Canadian Future Party off the ground, trying to get nearly 400 candidates, trying to fundraise, trying to run in the next election, trying to get yourself on the televised debate. I mean, all the things, right? You don't have a name recognition problem in the Maritimes, but you probably, if you come out to Western Canada, a lot of people would be meeting you for the very first time. So how are you doing it at a time of great upheaval? The Trudeau Liberals were destined for the tank, and then Carney saves it. Pierre Poilievre was the next Prime Minister of Canada until he wasn't. The NDP is now led by Avi Lewis, who's got his own priorities different from Jagmeet Singh's. And we wonder what will happen with the Greens when Elizabeth May decides that her time is up, and the list goes on. So take us into where you're at. And I guess ultimately, to put it plainly, here's time for your pitch.
So the first thing is you got to be ready when lightning strikes. And that means building up your organization, building up your team, like you were saying, doing the behind the scenes work that often gets ignored in parties. And if you're going to build a genuinely democratic party, and I encourage folks to check out I know you shared the link. And if people have questions, by the way, you can write to me at leader@thecanadianfutureparty.ca, or you can call me on my cell, 1-506-238-5550.
What?
I've been giving out my number for my entire time in politics. You know what? I've had 2 people abuse it by calling me in the middle of the night.
Wow.
Please remember the time zone difference. Don't call me between 2 and 6 in the morning. I don't sleep much, but I need a little. But my pitch is, let's talk. That I am much less concerned about the Canadian Future Party as a vehicle, although obviously I'm putting my life into this. I'm doing it now as a volunteer because I think this is more important than a pension. We need to have conversations. I was up in Caledon, Ontario last week talking to some folks and saying exactly that we need to get into rooms with each other and talk about the big issues that are hitting our country right now and about what we want to do to fix them. And my party is an organized structure to take some of those ideas and put them out in policies that are already having some effect. We've had, again, some lifted up by the Liberals, which is great. But there's no party right now that is going to be willing to talk about the radical structural changes that Canada needs, except for mine. And the reason for that is that my party is largely filled with people who have experience in the other parties and have looked at them, and they see that same problem I talked about when I said that Canada's kind of joined the European mainstream. Except for the European mainstream is not sustainable. It's not going to survive. So if you want a party that's going to put democracy front and center, is going to take some concrete examples, give MPs more power. When I was minister here in New Brunswick and wrote the PC Party's platform in 2018, one of the things that was in there was a commitment that anything that was not in our platform in 2018 should be a free vote, should be up to the premier, should be up to party leaders, prime ministers, to convince their own backbenchers to support government bills if those arise after the government's elected. Everyone should support the platform. If you're elected on a platform, I think it's fair to vote for that. But after that, give people more freedom. That if we want to see MPs not crossing the floor to get nice jobs, as we've seen far too many Tories and New Democrats do, as Mr. Carney has enticed them. Make it clear. Another law that I had passed here in New Brunswick. If you're going to cross the floor, you can only sit as an independent, or you have to step down and run in a by-election. So restoring more integrity into politics, and you're going to be seeing over the next few months my party putting out documents about how to put some more flesh on those bones. Because I would argue that we need an almost, and make it very, very clear here, small r religious movement here with democracy as the focus, where we do not break faith with the traditions of honesty, truth-telling, and accountability that a free press, political parties, the civil service, and the courts and the public have all been part of over the last 150 or so years, which made Canada the best country in the world. And a similar recipe is being used elsewhere, whether it's in the European democracies like the UK, where it grew up over hundreds of years, places like Germany, where they adopted it quickly after World War II, or more recently, Taiwan, which is bumping up against us or even going past us in a lot of the different measurements. And they were a military dictatorship up until 1987. I was there a couple of years back. You wouldn't believe the advancement and the level of development there, using the same tools that we have. And finally, we've got to get back to being ambitious. And I think that with all the chaos in the world, it's so easy to get distracted and not look at the big picture, the core issues that really decide whether a country is going in the right direction or not. Obviously, national defense was a huge one that's now getting more attention, rightfully so. But until we can start to talk to people across the country and engage people with ideas on how we're going to handle these huge transformations with AI and the other areas that we've chatted about, nothing is going to change. And a Liberal Party that's sadly committed to an ethnic bloc voting base, and trying to pick up groups here and here with sort of micro-niched strategies, very much like parties had been doing since the 1990s, but that was a different time. And the Conservatives, who can't decide whether they're going to hop into the populist Shark Tank or try and go back to a more normal form of Canadian conservatism, and as long as they refuse to make that choice, they're dead in the water. So what we want to try and do, both to gain advantage for my own party, of course, but ultimately the main point is to try and change the debate in the country, is show that Canadians meeting face-to-face, talking about politics, based around a really, really clearly defined sandbox, that within that democratic sandbox, we need to fight like hell to defend anyone's right to say things, no matter how foolish. But you cannot go outside that sandbox. We should not be tolerating people talking about the destruction of our country, about replacing democracy with communism, fascism, or any other number of idiotic ideas that have been tried and failed, or shredding the country in ways that are clearly advancing the goals of foreign adversaries. So we need to be clearer about who our adversaries are. I'm very clear in that. They are China, they are Russia, they are the dictators, they are the elements in the Trump administration influenced by those autocrats. We need to be clear about, in Canada, how we would impose any restrictions on anyone, because the danger as well is if you let seditionist movements spread too far, then people start to demand a reaction, and it goes too far the other way, and you start to see people's liberties being infringed. Mm-hmm. So if we want a conversation about how we protect maximum freedom in Canada with having a government that is as efficient as it possibly can be, and a country that is as free as it can be, then that starts with a conversation that, as far as I can tell so far, only my party is trying to have. So I encourage folks to look on our website. Again, if you feel like it, give me a ring, 506-238-5550, or leader@thecanadianfutureparty.com.
I love that you give out your personal phone number in interviews. That is a wild move, and you're walking the walk, man. I love it. You're building from the ground up.
It's democracy, right? Like I went out in the streets in Toronto a couple of years ago and got arrested, being the only guy standing up against a crowd of thousands of Islamists screaming horrible anti-Semitic things. And all I said was free Palestine from Hamas, which is Canada's government policy, but not in the streets of Toronto where you can get arrested for it. But if you don't have a willingness to go out and put yourself on the line for things you believe in, which I think is a lot of what upsets people who are not seduced necessarily, but tempted by populism, is that a lot of the populists come out and they sound brave, right? They'll come online and say stuff that sounds tough and hard, but there's no follow-up and there's no plan. Yeah. So you've got to have the courage on the one hand, but you've also got to have some plan for what you're going to do with it. And otherwise we just fall into this performative trap where ultimately whoever's the better actor wins. And mentioned Mr. Trudeau. I think it's great that we've let that era of celebrity politics put it in the rearview mirror. But now we're replacing celebrity politics with reality TV politics, where it's all just about social media clicks and who can win online votes and the sort of divisiveness that is causing us great damage around the world. It would be hard enough to have a conversation about how we control those new technologies, even if we were living in a period of wealth and stability like the 1990s. Doing it now, while we are in the face of a global conflict that has already begun, only going to spread over the next couple of years, is the biggest challenge that democracies, I think, have ever faced. And I say that knowing full well that 1940 was less than 100 years ago, and we came close to losing the democratic world then if the Nazis had been able to beat the UK, and who knows what would have happened. So I really hope that those watching and listening to your show today just forget about your day-to-day life. Take a step back, look at the situation the world's in. Do you really think this is going to get better? And if you don't, What are you going to do as a citizen in one of the only countries in the history of our species on this planet where you as a normal person have the chance to get involved, do something about it? What are you going to do? What I'm doing is working for free to try and make change in this country. And until we get other folks who are willing to start those conversations, we're going to keep getting the same results. So let's liven up the debate. Let's change the conversation inside those big parties, and let's give more space to parties that, not because we're new, that doesn't mean anything. Look at our ideas, look at the way we've developed them. We spell out how we develop our policies based on evidence, based on a democratic moral view that we take incredibly seriously. I hope people will give us a look. But in the meantime, much more important, let's fight like hell so that Canada stays strong and united, and we can get back to the stuff that matters, which is making our government work properly in Ottawa for all of us from coast to coast to coast.
Amen, brother. I love the passion. I appreciate every time we get a chance to talk. Thanks for making time for us. Next time you're in Alberta, we'll get you in studio, okay?
Looking forward to it. See you
All
soon.
right.
Take
You
care.
got it. That's the leader of the Canadian Future Party, Dominic Cardy, former cabinet minister in New Brunswick, of course, and Real Talkers have a lot to say about this. I was just trying to decide now, Johnny, if anybody has any feedback for the show, like after the live stream ends, are you cool with maybe if we just give them your cell phone number and then people can just call you directly?
I mean, here's the thing, though. I think if you dig even a little, it's not hard to find someone's phone number, but saying it's repeatedly
I respect that
on a live stream is a whole other world.
I respect the hell out of that move because there is no way I would give my number out on this live stream, and most of you are friendly. I love most of you guys.
I was just about to vote for you, Dominic, till you did that.
Yeah, right.
And then I was like,
hey, you know what?
I don't know if I want this guy's
passion like that, and here's the thing: is like we're going to get to a lot of your comments here, and we got to fit in a quick break because without our advertisers, the show is nothing. But I would say this, I love Peter's chances pointing out in our chat says, toddler tantrum politics. I feel like that should be the title of the short, the title of the highlight that goes out with Dominic here a little bit later on today. But, you look at an upstart party like this, and this is like he's working for free, he's volunteering, he's trying to get this party off the ground. There's probably a million reasons why it makes no sense, just like anything else in life that's not easy. There's a million reasons why it would be easier to not do it, to not start that company, to not run for president of your community league, to not put your name out there to be a school board trustee, to not, start something new once you get fired, or to not come out of retirement to do something because you feel like you still got gas in the tank or whatever. There's a million reasons to not do things, but it's the reasons to do them that inspire people. And I don't know, with someone like Dominic, all I know is that anecdotally, I'm not endorsing the Canadian Future Party or anything like that. I'm not running for the Canadian Future Party. But I will say this, like the feedback in the chat, anecdotally, is that what Dominic was saying was resonating with a ton of you. And so I would say that, you could provide some encouragement to them. Maybe this could be a future positive reflection presented by Solar by Kubi on Mondays here on Real Talk. Maybe you could provide some feedback to them and let them know. Maybe you make a donation to the party if you're able. Maybe you run for that party in a future election. I don't know. But unless more people, like I'm thinking right now, the next federal election, if there was a Canadian Future Party candidate in my riding, how seriously would I dig into the platform, seek to understand their top priorities more? You can check out their party platform right now. It's on their website. I'm showing it here. It's 25 pages. I love this. They got a little Post-it note superimposed on the title page. It says, Mr. Carney, Mr. Polyev, steal our ideas, please. And then it's signed off by Dominic. I love that idea. I love the branding. You may go, this upstart party, am I going to vote for them? They're probably not going to win. Their candidate's probably not going to win in the riding. But like, how do you think that those parties get off the ground? How do you think it happens? It happens with people deciding to run for them. Are they going to have like 340 candidates next election? People who decide to knock doors for them, to volunteer, to put up lawn signs. How do you think that, Preston Manning's name came up here earlier, Reform Party. Manning built Reform into a force. But like at the beginning, you'll remember, it was just a few, right? It was like Deborah Gray. Everybody loved her. She'd ride her motorcycle around. And then Preston Manning. And then all of a sudden, they were like the official opposition. And it was a thing, right? So I'm curious to know where you land on what you think the potential of the Canadian Future Party is. Again, you can check him out at the CanadianFutureParty.ca. You can let us know your thoughts anytime in an email to talk@RyanJespersen.com. A ton of you have had a lot to say about this, and we want to give you the floor in just a quick second. Before we do, there's a few things we have to mention, and that includes the fact that it is barbecue season now. That is just a fact. Although I know a lot of you've written in past when you've heard me say that, you go, Jespo, it's barbecue season 12 months a year. I don't disagree. But if you're feeling inspired right now and you happen to live in our home province of Alberta, I want to encourage you to pop into a Freson Brothers. There's 16 of them that you can visit across the province. In particular, their butcher shop. That's where you can find Mile 12 cabin sausages, Mile 12 cabin patties, and their brand new offerings. These are marinated meats, 100% Alberta pork and chicken, crafted and marinated in store. This is as fresh as it gets, perfect for the barbecue, the oven, even the air fryer. You can try spatchcock chicken, barbecue ribs. They've got souvlaki offerings, many options. Absolutely perfect and ready to go. If you're looking to make something from scratch, impress your guests, check out Chef Alexi's Marinade. This is a Red Seal chef, by the way, a ginger scallion marinade. You combine all the ingredients into a mason jar. It's going to make you look brilliant in front of whoever you're entertaining. You can find it at Freson.com/barbecue season. Freson Brothers is proudly Alberta grown and Alberta owned. If you're looking to keep money in your pocket by way of saving on electricity or natural gas costs this year, if you're looking to get solar panels up on your roof, today is the best day to get a free solar quote from our friends at Kuby, online at kuby.ca. That's KUBY.ca. For 11 years and counting, they've been powering communities with clean, efficient solar energy tailored to your needs. So whether it's an install at the Edmonton Convention Center like we're showing you now, maybe it's an installation on a barn roof, or maybe it's on the roof of your condo or your home, Kuby is going to hook you up better than anybody else in Western Canada. The cleanliness and the efficiency of their design is unparalleled. Oh, and by the way, Kuby's also presenting sponsor at the Real Talk Golf Classic. What's not to love about the team at Kuby? Again, you can get that free solar quote today at kuby.ca. That's KUBY.ca. If you're looking for an adventure, if you're looking for a one-of-a-kind night out in Edmonton, I would love for you to join me at Carrot by Moonlight coming up this Saturday, June 13th at the Santa Maria Goretti Center in Edmonton. 4 of Edmonton's top chefs, Spencer Thompson, Zach Eaton, Priya Windsor, and Kelsey Johnson, are each going to be receiving, this is really neat, mystery boxes packed with everyday and culturally inspired ingredients. Then they're going to transform them into an unforgettable 3-course dining experience. We're going to enjoy live performances, storytelling, culinary surprises, and an immersive evening celebrating creativity, culture, and community. And all of this is going to support the important work of Arts on the Ave Edmonton Society. Don't miss one of Edmonton's most unique fundraising events of the year. You can check out the goings-on link at thecarrot.ca. That's thecarrot.ca. It's Carrot by Moonlight coming up Saturday, June 13th. Tickets still available. I hope to see you there. Albertans are winning every day with Play Alberta because all revenue stays in the province, and that makes all the difference. Play Alberta is the only app in the province that puts all revenue directly back into supporting programs and services that Albertans rely on every day. So whether you play, bet, or buy with casino, sports, or lottery, know that your fun also helps make a difference across the province. You can learn more by visiting playalberta.ca/realtalk. That's playalberta.ca/realtalk. You've got to be 18 or over to play. If you gamble, please use your game sense. And you know, every Thursday on the show, Alberta Wins. It's a feature presented by Play Alberta. We tell stories, many of them submitted by you, of Albertans making a big impact on the international stage. Submit an Alberta win to talk@RyanJespersen.com before Friday of this week, and you will qualify to win 4 courtside seats at the Edmonton Stingers game on Saturday. That's June 13th against Scarborough. I'm talking courtside seats, like the heels of your sneakers are going to be on the floor. 4 seats. Send an Alberta win by Friday to talk@RyanJespersen.com. You see what these courtside seats are going for, like at Madison Square Garden. Absolutely nuts with the NBA Finals. Did you see there was, I think they saw there were 2 of them that had gone up for grabs. They were looking for $1 million.
Yeah, I believe it.
To get out there courtside.
It's the biggest ticket right now. 1973, Knicks 7-1.
Bonkers.
This is going to be, I'm rooting for you, Knicks. Knickerbockers, I'm on the train. I'm on the bandwagon. It would be great to see it. I don't want to speak out of turn because a lot of sports you kind of can see who's going to be in the final most years, but this you couldn't see this a mile away.
I've got a buddy who says Wemby's going to win like 3 titles in the next 10 years. He doesn't need to win this one. Says, give this one to New York. Wemby's going to get his titles. Don't worry about it. I love this from John Sean in our live chat powered by Park Power. Just says, Dominic Cardy says, that guy was absolutely awesome. Lightning Rod says, the problem with Cardy's message is that he thinks that countries are in charge. Banks are in charge, which is an interesting comment there. Whitetrium just says, there are no justified grievances when it comes to Alberta and Ottawa. Whiterim, I'm not sure everyone would agree with you, but that's fine. Tracy says, I heard that the Trudeau/NDP pipeline actually made record profits this year.
Hey, Trudeau and
that was really good for Alberta.
KP out at Tribeca. Look at how good they look.
Oh, you knew you had to slide a
quick here, guys.
Justin Trudeau photo into it all.
A little True Daddy content for you here. They are still going. Remember, everyone was like, this is totally fabricated. And they look really, as politics aside, hey, living his best second life, I would say, right now.
Yeah,
politics.
I would say so. I saw his post here. Look at your comment is the first that comes up.
Trudeau it is on there. True Daddy.
His Instagram
Look at that.
Says, what a special night. Huge energy on screen. Huge energy in the audience. So happy to be by your side, Katie. Yeah. And there's this show's.
Look at her comment, though. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
It's Catherine to you, baby. Oh, it's so hot and steamy. I can't handle it.
Look at the spelling of Catherine. Kathery.
That is a unique one. Usually there's no E, right?
I like that. Should we with trepidation head into the replies?
No, let's not
Katie's
spend too
comment.
much time. I just wanted to.
Oh, it's nothing but love.
I just wanted to check in and
it's
just show
but
that
love.
It's still going.
Yeah, look at that. Nothing but love. If you want an update on what Justin Trudeau's doing now, check out our most recent interview with Supriya Dwivedi on Monday.
I thought you were going to give like some sort of.
We got Trudeau coming on next week to talk to us about
some sort of pop blog or something. But
this is the.
I don't know. Like I know it's not important, but I'd pay for the sex tape.
Johnny, can we say that?
It's a hot couple right there. Can't deny it.
You would pay for the sex tape. Oh my God. Okay. I'm a little rattled by that comment.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, we can move on.
Let's go back to Dominic.
I was going to say that issues. I think that I think most people would probably rather talk about the sex tape, but we may not get another interview with another politician if we start doing that. That's the Real Talk Roundtable that I really want is Justin Trudeau and Katy Perry in studio together. Yeah.
We'll
fly him
out.
Well,
here's the thing, and now I can say it.
Can we afford the PJ?
Well, Supriya said that she's allowed to, she was at the first thing I texted her when I saw her first photo going up with, the politicos and people she was hanging out with. I'm like, have you met KP yet? She's like, no, not yet. But yeah. I got to see a KP Supriya pic sometime before I'm dead.
Joker 1975 in our chat says, Ryan loves Justin. Alpha Baracco says, Justin is gone. All right. Ms. Katie says, no, I'm not going to read that comment, actually. I'm not going to read it. I learned very early. My mom is a very, very wise lady.
Don't give him water. Don't give him air.
No, my mom taught me don't ever ask about pregnancy. Ever.
Oh,
don't ever ask somebody if they're pregnant. Don't ever ask somebody if they plan on being pregnant. Don't ever ask somebody if they have been pregnant. The worst is
when you see someone and you think, and then you put your hand out and you touch. I see people do it. I'm like, what? You are just crossing so many lines right now. It's incredible.
Les in our chat says, he says, Justin Trudeau got Alberta a pipeline. Are people that stupid that they can't even acknowledge that? Les, nobody wants to give him credit. I saw somebody the other day that was talking about the fact that they spent too much for it. It cost too much.
I would argue, I don't think he got it, but he definitely saved it when everyone backed out. And then people will say, well, Canada had to pay for it. But he did. He got it.
He did. He didn't have to pay for it. This is not the Justin Trudeau tribute hour. It's just a fact. JJ Needs a Nap says, I hear what Dominic's saying in the interview, but there's a metric shit ton of folks. I love that. I'm stealing that. A metric shit ton of folks who disagree with new pipelines. And I think Carney is walking that road right now. Says, I suspect it will happen, but it does need time. And I agree with that to a certain extent. I'm not 100% sold that it's all talk, no action on a new pipeline. I'm also not 100% sold on a new pipeline that it's going to happen. But I do think that in good faith, Alberta and Ottawa talking is a good thing. I do think that that's a good thing. Erica says, Cardy on the show, gosh, this guy is so refreshing. I love that he uses the term normal people unapologetically. This is the kind of anti-separation talk that we need. Normal people don't want to separate. That is 100% true, which is absolutely correct. And I totally agree. And don't ever let anybody tell you that normal people is an unacceptable phrase. I think we do want to be sensitive and careful about when and where we use it if you're implying that somebody that's a little bit different is not a, quote, normal person. But when you're calling a spade, saying like an idea is fucked and people who believe in that idea wholeheartedly are ignoring basic reality, then I'm okay with invoking the normal people. JJ says some of the attention that we're getting specific to Alberta, like Dominic said, is very negative and is having a real-time effect on business. JJ says my company is feeling this firsthand. Our budgets are shrinking and outside business is slowing. This is not a promotional read. This is just, we partner with the Alberta Chambers of Commerce and we're proud to. I'll let you know, JJ, you're a perfect candidate to take a moment before the 12th of June. That's the Friday, right, Johnny? The 12th of June. Take a moment to fill out the Alberta Perspectives Provincial Priorities Survey. We've punched it into our live chat already. It'll be in the show notes for the majority of you that are going to catch this later. Again, this is the Alberta Chambers. Every year, they want to hear from business owners and operators about the top issues and priorities that are standing out to you, and that helps them advocate accurately. It helps them advocate like sincerely on behalf of the member businesses, the Alberta Chambers members, as they endeavor to build Alberta's future together. You have until June 12th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. It takes about 8 minutes. It took me like 6 minutes. They say it'll take about 8 minutes. Again, that's the Alberta Perspectives Provincial Priority Survey. You can find the link in the show notes, JJ, and others, business owners, operators, if you'd like to have your say and have your voice heard, which, obviously I would imagine would be appealing. Susan, who's watching our live stream presented by California Closets on Facebook, says the mainstream media needs to get on board with warning people that we are in extreme danger. When it comes to Alberta separation and the factors associated with it, we need to wake the people up. And Susan, I totally agree with you. Tracy C says it's going to be a painful couple of years here. We need to focus on national defense and trade deals away from the United States. That from Tracy. And I don't know, I would say for the most part, Tracy, you'd probably find this federal government agreeing with you on that. My name goes here says, man, I like this guy, Dominic Cardy. I didn't expect to. This is one of my favorite compliments, Johnny. Earmuffs, kids. My name goes here says, this guy fucks for sure. Hell yeah. No ignorant assholes are going to block him out. And I love that. Just as no one can say shit about my opinion on a BC pipeline. Speak freely, friends, in our live chat. That's exactly the point. Les says this guy needs to come and speak at universities across the province of Alberta, which is good. Yeah, I don't mind that idea. A lot of you were talking about his career in provincial politics. If you Google him, if you learn more about him, I met him when he was education minister in New Brunswick, and he was stirring things up. And he. I mean, you can read all about it yourself, but he's a man of principle, and he essentially he essentially said goodbye to like a legacy career in politics as a cabinet minister in government, and a popular one at that, to stand for the principles that he believed in, and I give Dominic credit for that. So. If you want to ask him more about it, I guess you can just call him directly at the number he provided here on the show, right? Which is good. And Bustion says separatist leaders are grifters, and so they've all started their own third-party advertisers, which is true. Well, not that they're all grifters, but I would say that a lot of them are, and it's worth keeping an eye on exactly what they're asking you for and how they're asking it. Take a look at who's monetizing Alberta separation right now. Look at who's making out like bandits. Who is asking you and your grandparents for their money? Mm-hmm. Pay closer attention to that. Pay close attention to what Ezra Levant is doing at Rebel. Pay close attention to what Derek Fildebrandt is doing at Western Standard. Pay close attention to the clowns with flat brim hats and tank tops that are asking you to support what they're doing, even if they're not from Alberta, but they've come here, the land of milk and honey, to cash in on the thousands of people that will e-transfer them dough every month under the belief that it will help them and their families be better off. It will not. And you're right. We need to disinfect those movements with more sunlight, John.
Take a look at my girlfriend grifters. Man, they really make a lot.
I like that. Tracy says Alberta separatists are hurting Alberta as well as the rest of the country. We seem like spoiled brats who are not grateful for high incomes and plentiful resources. Huh. Yeah. By the way, another one of you says your city councilor gave them your number, says that's why I voted for him.
Jesus.
The old goat says religion has not been in politics for decades. I would say bullshit. Husker Nation says religion doesn't belong in politics or the creation of laws. I would agree. You can't tell me, looking at the United States right now, that religion is not factoring into politics. You can't tell me, looking at Alberta right now, Alberta's restricting access to abortion. Alberta's restricting access to medical assistance in dying. Alberta's pulling literature off school shelves and out of public libraries. You can't tell me that religion is not factoring into politics in Alberta. That's insane. As a matter of fact, what do the judges say? Overruled. Boomshanker X is wondering, how can I vote for Dominic Cardy? Well, you can look into it. We chatted about it.
I like the idea of a Judge Jespo segment
where I would just I could be Judge Judy, kind of. Like we'd hear the two sides.
We look at two opposing opinions
Yeah.
from other shows or other, and then you say innocent, guilty, or overruled. Overruled would be like your tagline.
Ooh. We could just call the feature Overruled. But then people would feel like it wasn't happening in good faith. Like they would say you have this predestined outcome.
He's not even a judge.
He's not even a judge. Maybe I'll go to Athabasca University online at athabascau.ca and maybe I'll go get a law degree. I don't think that they have a law school, but I could. What undergrad do you need? I think you can apply for law school with any undergrad.
I don't care. I would pay for a live
You just got to write the LSAT.
That was called Jespo Goes Back to College.
Oh my gosh. I barely got out.
Jespo goes back to uni. He's got a backpack.
It feels like one of those like 80s kind of comedies, the ones where they have like it would be like a Weekend at Bernie's style.
He's in the cafeteria. He's like, "What's up, dudes?"
It would be like I'd be like Steve Buscemi with the hat on and the skateboard. Hello, fellow kids. Okay. Anyway, I promise that I'm not going to go back to university, but I have always used...
I'm not making fun of it. A very good friend of mine, probably one of my closest female friends, a nurse, is going to law school. She's like 40. She's
amazing. I love that. I think that's amazing.
She's switching it up.
I mean, I was talking about Athabasca University, and we've been paying attention the last couple of weeks because let me just find it and just show you what I'm talking about. But this is super cool. We're proud to partner with Athabasca. Johnny, I'm not going to turn it into an ad read. This is just like
it's
super
important.
cool. This is one of the reasons why we love partnering with them. But if you look at this, I don't have to look too far. Check them out. You follow them on Instagram at Athabasca U. How cool is this? So it is convocation, and this is the time of year where a lot of Athabasca grads are they're going to be walking across. They're going to be getting their degrees, their diplomas, and look at all these features. Like I'll pick one at random. All these features. This is. Look at this. This is amazing. This guy, Bazi Muhaba, he's a class of 26 grad. His journey began in a refugee settlement in Zambia. He talks about how, his career started long before he had a degree. He talks about how Athabasca or AU and education has served as a pathway forward for him. That's one example. But look here, we'll just pick another one like at random. Look at this. They're graduates. First convocation back in 1977 had just 2 grads. And this year, almost 2,200 grads will receive AU parchments. And you look at their stories and where they're coming from, the different details behind what drew them to Athabasca University. It's obviously a very different structure than any other university. They've removed all these barriers, right? So what about this one from Karen Razik, who's a Bachelor of Nursing grad this year, says, an immigrant, I just began with English second language classes. I carried a dictionary everywhere just to understand. And at 55 years of age, she's graduating from AU. How cool is this? I don't know. These are the stories that just, I don't even know these people, and I'm proud of these people. You know, going back to school. Can you imagine you go back to school in your 50s? That's one thing. Imagine you're doing it in like a second language, right, or a third language.
This is incredible.
I just think it's so cool. So shout out to. I mean, look at all these stories. We could spend like an hour going through these, but this is super duper cool. Oh, by the way, I should mention, as we're looking at their Instagram, you see this post back on May 6th. Can studying primates tell us more about ourselves? Athabasca University researcher Dr. Hugh Notman studies primate behavior, and Dr. Hugh is just back from a big international journey, a research trip, and is going to be joining us on the show a little later on this month to talk about what we can learn about ourselves from primates like baboons. How cool is that going to be?
Primates are, I used to be obsessed with them when I was a kid.
So cool,
I was obsessed with Egypt and how the pyramids communicated with aliens, potentially. Aliens, that meme. And primates, because like you watch them and you're like, man, they're so close to us on the evolutionary chain. Like their mannerisms, their way of thinking, the way they get scared, and the way they feel, you know, pain and love and empathy, all these things. It's just like, man, they're like, I don't want to say better versions of us, because they tend to like go with like instinct rather than like, you know, the way we are today with ego. But it's fascinating to watch them.
It's only about an hour. I think it's maybe an hour 15, hour 20. I watched the other night a gorilla story told by David Attenborough. Have you watched it?
That's a good one. Yeah.
Oh,
it's crazy.
And also just, I would listen to David Attenborough narrate anything. You know, the guy just turned 100, and you saw that like King Charles, I mean, it's like everybody is like Sir David Attenborough is basically the best of humanity. And I saw that there's a review for a gorilla story told by David Attenborough in The Guardian. You can check it out at theguardian.com, and they describe it as basically, and this feels like kind of an interesting way to put it, but they say it's like one of our last meetings with an adored relative. I think everyone acknowledges that, you know, whatever. David Attenborough still sounds healthy, still looks healthy. That's great. But as someone reaches 100, you realize that, and someone that's made such incredible contributions to humanity, that challenges us to be our best version of ourselves in all of the most important ways. You know, you cherish those moments where that person is still on planet Earth. It's like kind of Jane Goodall. It's wild, like a similar scenario. So very cool stuff, and I highly recommend that. I also just want to let Real Talkers know how much it means to us when you let us know what you think about the show, and emails to talk@ryanjespersen.com. We got some great feedback from Rob Breckenridge's episode yesterday. I'm thrilled that Rob is joining our roster of ad hoc guest hosts, and so you'll have through the summer a few days where Supriya Dwivedi and Rob Breckenridge will host shows on days when I'm working elsewhere. And I have to imagine that a guy with, what does he have, 25 years experience in broadcasting, sort of seamlessly stepped in and held the attention of the audience. The feedback was glowing in our email inbox, so a big shout out to Rob for doing that. As we break for today, wanted to let you know a couple of quick things that are happening as we wrap this episode. Real Talk is off next week. We're hosting a number of different charitable fundraising events, literally working every single day. We just won't be in studio, including the Real Talk Golf Classic on the 18th on the Thursday. But that means that we're bringing back Supriya Dwivedi earlier as part of a panel discussion tomorrow. Canada's banning social media for kids under 16. Supriya's got a hot take, so will our guests, and we hope you'll join us then. We'll see you soon, Real Talkers.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lauren Sterlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton, member emerita Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.